Hey guys, it's Scott with Scottie B Cards, and in this video I want to look at 3 players who might be undervalued heading into the 2023 Major League Baseball season. So one thing I want to say right off the bat, I'm not telling you to buy these players. In no way do I want you to spend your money on any of these players because I said to do it. That is not what I want you to do. I just did the research on these players and thought maybe they're undervalued. If you want to do the same thing, look into these players. Never ever buy because someone online says they're a good buy. That's a good way to lose money. In the past, I've shown players like Paul Goldschmidt, Manny Machado were my picks last year I thought could do really good. And the reason I picked them is because they were Hall of Famers on a Hall of Fame path, I thought, and their cards didn't represent the value they provided. But we've seen them now both, I think Paul Goldschmidt won the MVP and Machado was second, and for that purpose their cards are now very expensive. And there's not really any players in Major League Baseball who I think are on a Hall of Fame path that's obvious that their cards are cheap, besides maybe one that I'll show in this video. But we can look at someone like Jose Ramirez, for example. His cards aren't cheap anymore. It could be because he's a big Guardians fan because of their postseason run, and he's had a really great season. He's projected to have more great seasons, but there's just no one that's a guarantee. And for that purpose, in this video, I looked at other ways to identify players I think could be a good buy, and these 3 players all have major inherent risk. I want to make that clear, but I think these players could beat the projections and have increase. So let's look at the first one. The very first one is Jacob DeGrom. You might be asking yourself, why would you have Jacob DeGrom? He's really not that great. If we look at his numbers, he's heading to his age 35 season with 43.8 WAR, 82 wins as the 35-year-old, only 1,600 strikeouts. He's only pitched in 209 games as a starter. Obviously, he is not that good. Well, there's a couple things I want to point out that show he is really, really good. And on top of that, I want to discuss peak versus longevity with Hall of Fame voting. We've seen the players like Sandy Koufax, really similar WAR numbers, honestly, and Sandy Koufax had a really great late 20s, early 30s, and then he was done. And so we can see players with a really great peak. If he can have one more great Jacob DeGrom type year, one healthy year, I think he could have a great chance at the Hall of Fame. But that's the big if with Jacob DeGrom is, can he make it? On top of that, with Jacob DeGrom, he left the Mets and now he signed with the Rangers, went from a really great market for collecting cards to the Rangers. I don't know how their cards do long term, but overall it's not as good as the Mets, which I think is a fair assumption. But there's a couple things I want to point out with Jacob DeGrom. Very first one, he averages 7 WAR for every 162 games played. So in a full season, he's worth 7 WAR. The average Hall of Famer is with 4.5 WAR, so significantly lower. This is why he has that peak potential. On top of that, in 2021, when he was like really dominant versus 2022, where he had like a low 3 ERA, which is pretty crazy that we consider that bad for him, he really wasn't doing anything different besides people were just hitting the ball a little bit harder, and I'm sure he has the data to fix that. So I'm confident about that heading into the next year as he's healthy. But if I want to look at one thing, there's a stat called adjusted ERA plus. ERA plus takes in consideration the era that this player pitches in, the offensive environment that they're pitching in, and the ballpark they're pitching in. And for that reason, this is a really good stat to compare pitchers across multiple years. And we will see Mariano Rivera is the highest at 205, but he is a relief pitcher, and then Bill Foster and Bullet Rogan both played in the Negro Leagues, but they did not play past the 1930s. And for that purpose, Jacob DeGrom is the highest ERA plus all time for a starting right-handed pitcher that played past 1940. Pretty insane to see how good he was. Pedro Martinez is just behind him. If you don't think Pedro was that good, go look at his stats in comparison to his competition in the steroid era. He was amazing. And that's one stat he's great at. And on top of that, we see WHIP, which is walks and hits per inning pitched. This is a very good indicator if a pitcher is a good pitcher. And we can see Jacob DeGrom as a starting pitcher is basically the highest all time behind Addy Joss. And he pitched again in the 20s and 30s. So it just shows Jacob DeGrom has all that potential. It's just he needs to stay healthy. And on top of that, leaving New York really hurt his card values. We can see that here. This is his gold parallel. This was a $1,000 card in March of last year, and it's dropped 41%. Now it's worth about $470. Card ladder says 441. And if we want to look at a bigger picture, we can see that his whole market is down 60%. I'm also not saying to buy this card. That's not what I'm getting at. I just wanted to show one of his cards. So we can see he's down big time in comparison to where he was. So here's why you should like Jacob DeGrom. Low number of rookie sets. He has no Bowman Chrome autographs. Low print run years. Like 2014, there wasn't much print runs. Low parallel years. Not many parallels. His Topps Chrome update card only has a black to 99 and a gold to 249. So not many of those exist. I say he was traded right here, but he actually just signed from a big market to a regular market, which also hurt his cards. So it presents a very unique buying opportunity. The risks here is injury risk plus leaving to a new market. Who knows how he'll do in the AL West. I assume he'll be fine because he's Jacob DeGrom, but he's getting older, 35. But if he's able to have one more DeGrom year, his cards are pretty cheap in comparison to where you would expect them to be for Jacob DeGrom. The next player is Wander Franco. The risk here is obvious. He is a player who is hyped up really high. His cards are still pretty high when you compare him to somebody who's a rookie, hasn't proved as much in the league as you would like to hope. But he has, I think he was the number one prospect 3 years in a row in 2019, 2020, and 2021. And on top of that, he's actually been really good in the big leagues. He's just been hurt all the time. We can see he's basically played one full season, 153 games, and he has a 122 OPS with 6 WAR. And this is a player who normally has longevity, normally doesn't get injured all that much, switch hitting shortstop, and he has all the potential in the world. And his cards are lower than Julio Rodriguez, which makes sense because Julio has actually shown it at the big league level more than Wander Franco. But I still think there's an opportunity for his cards. We can see he's a good defender according to defensive metrics like defensive WAR, and even outs above average. You know, they're kind of all over the place, but it's a pretty good sample size to say, yeah, he's above average as a shortstop. And he also averages 6.5 WAR for every 162 games played. And the career average for a shortstop Hall of Famer is 4.9 WAR. So he has the potential is where I'm getting at here. If we look at his minor league stats, we'll see that he was a 335 hitter and a 939 OPS guy in the minor leagues with more walks than strikeouts by quite a bit. He was just a really good player, and that translates to the big leagues. If we go look at his percentile rankings, he doesn't strike out, doesn't swing and miss. He does chase sometimes, but overall, he's a really disciplined hitter at age 21. You know, he's heading into age 22 season. That's a really good sign for a player who can adapt to big league pitching, and once he sees more and more of it, he'll start to punish the ball more. If I want to look at his splits, though, I get a little concerned. He does not hit that well at home. 50 points higher batting average on the road, about 50 or 60 points higher OPS on the road as well, which just shows he might not pick up the ball well at Tropicana Field, which is a big issue for some players. We saw that with Willie Adames, for example. He went to the Brewers. He said he couldn't get the batter's eye, and they did a great year with the Brewers. And we're also seeing that he can't really hit righties as well as he does lefties. So he's a switch hitter. He bats right-handed versus left-handed pitchers, and he bats left-handed versus right-handed pitchers because he wants to have that advantage. But he's obviously better as a right-handed hitter, and we're seeing that with almost, 80 points higher batting average and 200 points higher OPS. This is like a Hall of Fame, best shortstop in baseball type OPS. This is a league serviceable shortstop OPS. So we really want to see him figure that splits thing out because that's a little bit concerning. And I do want to show his card values are down 64% year over year, which just shows people are kind of starting to doubt Wander Franco. But I think we forget that not every single player has to be amazing at age 20. He's only 22 years old, still has 6 WAR in baseball. His cards are down even 4% over the last 30 days, according to Alt, which is a marketplace. If you want to look at his projections, here they are. Feel free to pause it. This is his 80th, 20th percentile. So this is like best case, a 148 OPS plus 4.7 WAR. Worst case is a 102 OPS plus 2.2 WAR. And if we want to look at Steamer, this is his best projection right here with 5.5 WAR and a 286 batting average for this upcoming year. And on top of that, we can see he's expected to average 3 to 4 WAR. He really needs to beat that over the next 3 years in order to actually increase in value. So the risk with Wander Franco is he a bust? I don't think he is. I don't think any of you really think he is yet, but will he figure it out and become an all-star? Or is he just going to be a league serviceable shortstop or a slightly above average shortstop? That's what we need to figure out. If you believe in him, I think he could be a good buy right now. The next player is Ronald Acuna Jr. His primary issue is he came back from tearing his ACL and he just wasn't as good. He just wasn't as good last year. Nobody can tell me that he was. Only worth 2.8 WAR. 114 OPS plus is not very Ronald Acuna like. And if we look at his OPS, you can see it's almost 230 points lower. That's because he forgot how to slug the baseball. His slugging dropped from basically 600 to basically 400. That's a 200 point drop, which is not great. His actual on base percentage also dropped, but still a 350 on base is still really good. And we can look down here in his advanced battings to see what happened. His line drive percentage went down, his fly ball percentage went down, and his ground ball percentage went up like 16% year over year, which just shows he's still smoking the ball really, really hard. It's just right at infielders. He's just hitting it on the ground and getting thrown out at first. And we can see his sprint speed is actually a little bit lower year over year, which might be why he's being thrown out. Maybe he was just conserving his sprint speed, not really sprinting as much because he doesn't need to. But overall, that's a little concerning. His other percentile rankings aren't that much worse than where he was. And that's what I want to point out. It's just he needs to make a few tweaks. And if he does, I think he'll be the same Ronald Acuna Jr. The problem with Acuna that's interesting, he's never really had a monster season. This one year, he almost had a 40-40 season, which was great, top 5 MVP voting, but only a 5.1 season. And that's just because he's just never really been amazing in every part of the game yet. And I think we're going to eventually see that. This year in 2021, when he got hurt, he had 3.6 WAR in like the beginning of July. That would have been a 7 WAR season. And I think he would have won the MVP over Bryce Harper if he just stayed healthy. Would have been close to a 40-40 season. He had almost 1,000 OPS, 158 OPS plus. He was was just really good on the World Series winning Braves team. So I really like Acuna. I just hope he can figure his game out again and his knee doesn't bother him anymore. That's the big risk. We can see he's trending below Hall of Famers like Mookie Betts, Mike Trout, Ken Griffey Jr., and he has to have a 10 WAR season this next year to keep up with Mookie Betts, and I just don't really see that happening, but I think he has better than a 3 to 4 WAR season, and if he does, that's a good year for Acuna, and I think his cards could go up because they're down pretty significantly. I do want to show here his percentile rankings. This much red for a player is not normal. It's extremely abnormal. Go look up Nolan Arenado. You will not see this much red. You can even look up Paul Goldschmidt. You'll see probably more red than Arenado for offensive metrics, but overall this is abnormal, and he's really, really good. He's good at everything. He just needs to figure out how to hit the ball in the air again. One thing that he does do that's pretty cool, he has the slowest home run trot in all of baseball last year. So he was the slowest around the bases. He likes to celebrate it, and I would not be surprised if he's even slower this year around the bases. Here's his price graph. You can see he's down 55%, which is significant, especially because he was viewed as like the best player in baseball just a few years ago. His Bowman Chrome autograph, this could be because it's a base Bowman Chrome autograph, but this is down, 51% year over year, and that was starting here, not here where he was actually higher, where he's almost $4,000. He's down probably, 75% from his actual peak in the last 12 months, but I think if you compare him to Juan Soto's Bowman Chrome autograph's like 23 to 2400, so it just shows that Acuna is being undervalued in comparison to his peers, and if you think Acuna is going to be a good ball player, his cards are a good price right now from where they've historically been. So all these players have inherent risk. Don't buy because someone on the internet said that they could be a good buy heading into the year. I am not buying these players. I'm buying Mookie Betts and Mike Trout like always. But if you want to speculate on these players, I think these three have a very interesting case if you want to dive into their cards and their statistics. But other than that, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, let me know in the comments below. Let me know if you believe in these players or don't, and if there's any other players you think will have a great year this next year that I should do another video on. Other than that, guys, I will see you in the next one.